Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I think the cookies are a helpful incentive. So also the deluxe seating in the front row doesn't hurt, yeah. So I appreciate the invitation to come and be with you. And the backstory, in addition to what Karen shared, is I spent about 8 years as an academic advisor for pre-pharmacy students. So the pre-health population, the pretty ambitious bar set to enter pharmacy school. And so that was kind of the first place that I got a lot of experience talking to students about majors that may or may not fit them well. And from there I went to OSU's College of Engineering, which is another place where sometimes it's a fit and sometimes it's not. And so then I got some additional experience talking to students about how this suits them and if they can see themselves doing the work, et cetera. And now finally, for the last 2 years, I've been in OSU's College of Forestry and Natural Resources, and that college is gated, if you will. In order for a student to change their major into one of ours in the College of Forestry, they have to have a minimum GPA and be in good academic standing, which is an interesting dynamic. It's, I have less advising out conversations there, but we have to really recruit in because we're small and people don't know that tourism and outdoor leadership is a thing you can study at college and that sort of thing. So anyway, this particular talk has evolved over time as I've worked with all those different populations. And so I hope to share some things that'll be helpful to you. Questions are welcome throughout the talk. I'll repeat them because we're being recorded, and that way the mic will pick up your questions for posterity. So make them good. So I don't know about you, but many times throughout my advising career, I have wished longingly for a sorting hat. As we talk about major and career fit with students. And unfortunately, outside of Universal Studios where you can visit Harry Potter land, I don't think such a thing exists. And so obviously the need for good advisors having good developmental conversations with students is strong. And what I think is important to know, and that you probably have observed in your students, is that 50% of students will change their major at least once in college. 25% of students change 2, 3, or more times. And so it's actually a norm to change your major or to make an adjustment partway through the program. And that is part of the framing conversation that can be really helpful for our students as well. And of course, as you know, in your role as academic advisors, we're dealing with a lot of things with these students. Like I was talking about pretty selective majors. The pre-health professions are a great example, but now in many cases there are lots of majors. Our public health program at OSU has a really high bar to enter. The business school has a high bar to move to the junior year. People going on to graduate and professional programs have certain metrics that must be met to move on. So when you're advising for those majors, it's important to keep those things at the forefront of the conversation. We're also seeing a lot of students who may have come of age in the millennial generation, and they're wonderful and they're lovely, and they've been told that a lot, and they've gotten a lot of participant ribbons and been given a lot of opportunities to redo things until they succeed at the level that they've decided is important, et cetera. And so hitting college can many times be really difficult for students who've had very little struggle leading up to that point. And of course, advisors, we have some ethical duties, duty to care, and duty to be honest to our students about where they are in the grand scheme of things and the perspectives for them to go forward. It's an ethical and moral concern for me in many cases when I'm working with a student who is repeating classes over and over and over and adding quarters or years to their time to degree that they're still spending money that they may or may not have to do this. And so I also think it's important for us to be having some conversations to just maybe shine some light on, here's what this is going to take. Are you sure that's okay for you, et cetera. So that kind of frames the context of where we're going with the conversation. And of course, in recent years, there's been a lot of research and publications around the foreclosure student. I think everybody's familiar with this. I feel like Alex has maybe even done a talk about this recently. Is that true? Yes, so I might be preaching to the choir, and apologies for that. So the foreclosure student, there's a great article in the Nakata Journal, which I've got on the last slide. They define the foreclosure student as people who have committed to an identity without active exploration. That is, people who have committed to someone else's values, beliefs, and roles they are the identity foreclosed students. So a little more about that. At first blush, the identity foreclosed individuals may appear to have an achieved identity. They present as pre-med, I'm gonna be a doctor, that's my identity. However, because their identity is not based on self-exploration, but rather on someone else's views and beliefs, excuse me for the typo, these people, although adamant about what they believe, tend to be less secure in their identities than achieved people. And an achieved person would be someone who had done that self-exploration and made a good conscious choice about their career opportunity in this case. I myself was a foreclosed student. I've only realized that in recent years. Hindsight is 2020. I was really involved in music growing up. My mom is a musician. Lots of my family members were musicians. My mom was an elementary school music teacher. And so I liked music. I felt like I was pretty good at it. I wanted to do something with that. And I specifically remember a day in high school when I was riding in the car with my mom and her best friend, another music educator that I looked up to. And we were talking about what I might do in college, what I might study. And my mom said, oh, you know, I've been reading about music therapy recently. That is a new thing that people are doing. What do you think about that? And I thought, well, that sounds good. That's a real job that involves the music that I like to do. My mom, who I trust and love and admire, has suggested this. And her friend, who I also trust and love and admire, is nodding her head that this is a good idea. And it was a helping profession, and that was important to me too. So I actually got into a music therapy program. I immersed myself. I was doing fine. I am the classic student that you see, right? Doing fine, grades are good, checking the boxes, going through the motions, but not actually fully invested in what's going on. And so I got to my junior year of college when I did some of the required practica experiences, going out and doing music therapy like a real big kid. And I realized that it's really great and it's really important and it does feel good, but I couldn't see myself doing that full time for the rest of my life. And at that point, I was so far down that major pathway, and I was spending my money right down to the dime to finish my degree. And so I actually opted to finish that degree rather than change. So I may not be a foreclosure success story in that regard, but I managed to move on to graduate school and find something that I was really passionate about. So I guess I see it now through this different lens of, you could do really well and be a student in foreclosure. You don't have to be a struggling student to be foreclosed upon your choice and your identity. So of course, when we're talking as academic advisors with our students, we do a lot of asking questions, probing, and determining fit. And so you can maybe see, I hope the light allows you to see this square peg and this round hole, and it's been kind of jammed in there to fit. And I think that determining that fit is part of so many of our conversations that we already have. And it's especially important with these students when you start to have an inkling that they may not be in a good fit major to start to probe. So a variety of different questions that I've used over the years, some may not be new information to you, but some ideas in general. Where did this idea come from? And how did this interest begin? That can usually be a very interesting story that will lead you to a lot of clues about how those seeds got planted. It might be a really quick whim. It might be a really strong decision that has been made by that student. The suggestion of family or friends, like I shared in my own example, can be particularly powerful for our students, especially now as we think about, I know we don't like to call them helicopter parents, but whatever your preferred term is for the parents that are highly involved, the bulldozer parents. I think I've seen Karen send around something about that recently that was interesting. But so these parents that have this really high level of involvement and engagement in their students' lives, even after high school and in the decision making that they continue to make. Did you get that on the video? That's good. Great, thanks. Social and cultural influences are interesting to discuss with students. I think a great example is when CSI came on the air and everybody suddenly was wanting to major in forensic science, regardless of their, stomach for the work, aptitude in chemistry, et cetera. That was a really strong sort of societal, cultural influence that was informing people's decisions. The recommendation of a teacher or a mentor, probably about as powerful as the suggestion of a family or friend. If you think about maybe a high school teacher or mentor or coach that you had a strong relationship with, somebody that was invested in your success, who knew you well, and who made some suggestions to you, that's very powerful. And when you then show up at your college or your community college or university, and this brand new academic advisor is questioning that recommendation, that's going to be a hard road to pave. You know, you're going to have to build a relationship with that student to a point where they can trust you as an authority and as an expert to provide that kind of insight and to be respectful of the recommendation that that teacher or mentor made, and maybe provide more information about why they might have made it and why it would be okay to move away from it now. How many, I'm curious, have ever advised a student whose degree choice was motivated by a desire for money, power, success? No. Anybody in the school of business? It's not limited there, but certainly in the group of students who wanted to be pharmacists, that is a great career. You make good money, the jobs are very stable, the hours are better than being a physician. That was a big motivator for a lot of people. I think when I talk to educators and people in academia, I can safely say, we understand the value of fulfillment in your work and quality of life aside from pay. That may not be what's motivating us strongly toward our career, but that is a real factor for some of our students. I like to ask students, what have you done already to explore this discipline or this career? Have you job shadowed? Have you volunteered or interned somewhere? Have you talked to somebody who's doing this work? Because many times these ideas are planted as seeds, very small seeds, something we saw on TV, something we hit up in a Facebook advertisement, a suggestion that was made over dinner by great Uncle Cliff. And so if you haven't had a chance to get out there and learn more about it, you may be operating on a deficit of information to make these important choices about your life. Basic question, are you enjoying the courses? Are you doing well? That is a reflection of what's to come in the job. These are the foundational skills that we think you need to go out and be successful in this career. Are you liking it? Does it engage you? Does it click for you? Is it really, really hard? And why? Those are powerful questions. And frankly, can you see yourself doing the work? Are the challenges of the work reasonable? I think a great example is that here in the state of Oregon and many states around the country, pharmacists give immunizations. Probably some of you have gotten like a flu shot or a shingles immunization from a pharmacist. And a lot of students who want to go to pharmacy school don't realize that they're going to have to stick needles in people every day as part of their job and may faint dead away at the sight of a needle. And that's going to be a real problem in performing the expectations of that job. So even some of those really practical realities about what the day-to-day is like. I see it with a lot of engineering students who don't want to sit at a desk or sit in a cubicle in front of a computer every day. But depending on what you're doing, that may be a very reliable everyday task in your work, and getting out on the job site might be like once a month. So it's important for students to have a realistic expectation of that. All of these things are good questions to ask as you're just determining fit, confirming that it's good, determining that maybe it's worth doing a little more thinking, probing, and reflecting with a student over a period of time. Obviously, some basic reasons why it may not be a good fit: academic ability, personality, or interpersonal skills. This one can be difficult to address, but if you think about somebody who wants to go into a very customer service or public-facing type of profession, but maybe has a really high level of discomfort with social interaction, that's a mismatch. That may not work well. Conversely, if you have an incredibly extroverted, engaged student who charges their batteries by talking to people, by helping people, and they want to pursue computer science and sit and write code and programming most of the time, they may be very drained by the work that they're doing. Motivation or lack thereof, that's pretty clear. I think one of the interesting things about motivation is so often we try to motivate our students rather than relying on them to motivate themselves. Is anybody familiar with Paul Axtell and his conversation work? Okay. So Paul began life as a chemical engineer and now is a communication expert. And he travels around doing workshops and facilitating groups, and he coaches. He's a professional coach for business professionals. And he talks about motivation being 100% intrinsic, that you cannot motivate another person, no matter how hard you want to. That has to come from that individual. And they might be inspired by your cheering along the sidelines. They might be encouraged by that. They might feel pressured by that. But his theory is that motivation is 100% internal. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I think it's an interesting idea to consider that as much as a parent or a family member or a mentor or you might want to encourage the student along the way until they've kind of bought in and found what connects for them, that motivation may be well outside their locus of control. And like I said, the ability to do the work required in the career, obviously a pretty important factor. So to frame up how to work with these students, I also like to throw in a little theory. I know that Karen Sullivan-Vance loves theory, and so when I come to talk on Karen's behalf, I feel like I ought to include it. So any William Perry fans in the audience? Not a one. Okay, that's all right. So William Perry's intellectual development theory or intellectual development scheme is the one that I think works well. I thought I would Google William Perry's picture to show you, and this is the first thing that comes up. That's not the theorist. Here's the theorist, but I thought that was maybe good fun. The older people in the room got the joke with me. Okay. So Perry's theory of intellectual development is that the way that our thought process evolves and our intellectual processes evolve is along a continuum from very simplistic thought to more complex thought. And we are in different positions along the continuum as we develop. There is not a lot of one position for this, another position for that. This position, really, if you are in sort of the relativism position, that is reflecting your entire worldview. It's not situational. It's not like, well, I'm sort of dualistic about this, but relativistic about that. Kind of one, this shapes how you are taking in information and how you are viewing the people who give you the information. You make progress, the real growth is in the transition, when you kind of move along the spectrum in kind of growing the way that you're thinking, growing the way that you're taking in information and making decisions and shaping your own opinions. That's where the growth comes. So obviously we're going to see students at different positions along the way. We ourselves are probably all at some different positions along the way. And I think it helps know a little bit about their thought process to frame the conversations that you might be having. So a student at the simpler end of the spectrum, a dualist in dualism, I brought you a Calvin and Hobbes sketch to illustrate. So a dualist sees the world black and white, right or wrong. Things are very cut and dried. And so Calvin here says, oh good, a true or false test. At last, some clarity. Every sentence is pure, sweet truth or a vile, contemptible lie. One or the other, nothing in between. So this is that dualist, like he is rejoicing in how clear-cut and black and white this is. And he looks at it for a minute and then he decides to flip a coin. So that might be an oversimplification, to be sure. Problems are solved in a dualist's mind by finding the right answer. And the right answer comes from an authority or an expert. So a teacher, a spiritual leader, a parent, those are authorities, those are experts, they've got the right answers. And that's yay or nay how it's gonna be. Alternative perspectives can be really confusing for a dualist, and there's just not a lot of critical thinking that's happening for someone at that stage of the game. Multiplicity is the position where now I recognize that everybody has an opinion. They might all be different. They are all equally valid, in my opinion. Like I can get my head around the fact that it's not one way or the other necessarily. You've got an opinion and you've got an opinion and you've got an opinion, and that's cool. But I still think that I can vet those opinions with an authority and get a right answer. So it's progress. It's recognizing multiple opinions, trying to reconcile those a little bit, but still finding an authority figure. Still highly influenced by the experts and authorities. Uncertainty is okay for someone who's in this multiplicity position. A little uncertainty for a little while is okay, whereas back in the dualism position, that's very painful. We want a decision, we want to decide on something. That's how we got foreclosed maybe on this career identity in the first place.
Nicole?
Yes?
Is there kind of developmental ages that go along with this type of behavior?
As I have read about it, I didn't see particular ages assigned to it. My opinion is that in our traditional age students, I would say a lot of first-year students come in pretty dualistic and maybe even in their sophomore year. But then as they're getting involved in a little more critical thinking, being exposed to some new things, if we're doing our jobs, if college is being college, they may very well be progressing to a more multiplistic or even relativistic. Heck, I would love it if they walked across the stage at commencement and were committed. We're all the way down here, but I don't know if that's the case. So the question was about whether or not there are age groups tied to this, and the answer is basically no, because we all kind of develop, as we know, different times, different ways. The next position along the development is relativism. And this is where finally we see critical thinkers truly emerging. And the puzzle pieces here are to demonstrate that we can see multiple perspectives and we can understand how together those multiple perspectives shape a larger view or inform the larger context of the problem or the issue that we're considering. And so a little more weight is given to an opinion that can be supported, maybe with some fact, with some evidence, with a good argument, the critical thinking piece again being demonstrated there. And students who are relativists will be challenging ideas, they'll be integrating morals and ethics into their conversations and decision making as well. Last but not least, the commitment to relativism. I felt like this summed it up. I am what I am, and your approval isn't needed. And it's not necessarily in a negative way. It is that this is where we have defined our personal choices. We have become very comfortable in our identity around a variety of parts of life, maybe our career, maybe our spirituality, maybe our relationships, etc. And those are firmly established, and it's okay if you don't agree with me. It's okay if you do something different. Your approval isn't needed. So that is your crash course in William Perry's scheme of intellectual development. How do we use it to work with students who need to maybe be moving to a different major, changing their plans? First, the practical approach, which I would say is probably most applicable with the duelists, the kind of black and white thinkers, or the folks who are just taking in a lot of opinions and trying to decide which one's the right one, kind of down to brass tacks. So a few strategies I've used, and I'm sure maybe all of you have used some of these too. The transcript overview. Any advisor will tell you that transcript tells a story, right? Especially if you look at it sort of chronologically, you can see some ups and downs maybe in a person's life. And oftentimes you can see trends in certain courses and high grades, other courses and low grades, et cetera, that might be telling to a student, look, did you see that you excel in every single chemistry class you've taken, and yet all of these writing courses have much lower grades, so why do you feel like journalism is the right fit for you? Those kinds of things can be illuminated sometimes on a transcript because it's right or wrong, an authority gave that grade, they must be experts. Referring to career services, I feel like that's right in the back pocket of most advisors. It's great to have those. Anybody from career services in the room? Oh, thank you, thank you. It's so great to have those partners to collaborate with because the folks at Career Services will be considered experts. They are authorities. They can even help with some aptitude tests, interest inventories, quizzes, lists of things for students to review. And those can be really powerful tools for students like this. And the suggestions that a career services, career counselor might make can be really powerful. They might also be able to help the student set up some job shadowing or some volunteering or practical experience to try a few things out and see what it's really like. And we all know that that's powerful learning too. I have assigned homework sometimes from advising sessions with varying success, of course, but maybe having a series of conversations with the student. All right, I'm going to see you again in 6 weeks. And before then, I would like you to go to career services, talk to somebody who is actually a mechanical engineer, and talk again to the mentor who suggested it to you to find out why they thought this would be a good fit. Some things to do, some thinking, some action to take that you can follow up on later. To that end, sometimes a timeline or a contract for the change can be powerful for these students. So saying, I understand that this is going to take some time. This is not an overnight choice. It's important. And I understand that you need to do your investigation and your consideration, and you probably need to talk to your close, trusted advisors. But we're going to set a timeline, maybe over the course of the next 6 months, the next year, activities to complete, points that we're going to check in, and a goal of having a firmer decision in a better fit major by X time. We all know that deadlines get missed, so it's not like that would be a disaster if the student wasn't comfortable with a change by that time, but sometimes just putting some deadlines on it will push students to do the work. People respond pretty well to a deadline. Money talks. I have found this to be particularly effective with students who are on limited funds for school, need to be really wise with that money, and who may be chronic repeaters of courses. So taking math over and over and over without succeeding, sometimes it can be very powerful to say, let's figure out how much it's going to cost to take all these classes. I had students who wanted to take organic chemistry, every part of it, 3 times, because it took 3 times for them to get it right. Well, okay, but if you have to then go on to biochemistry and take all of those classes 3 times, and then medicinal chemistry and take all of those classes 3 times, what is it going to cost? And what is the cost to you personally in terms of time and effort? And does that illuminate, wow, I'm making this a lot harder than maybe it has to be. Maybe there's another way I can do this more efficiently. The side-by-side stats comparison. Sometimes I talk about this and people go, and so I say to you that this should be done with great discretion. You can decide, obviously, if it's the right kind of talk for this particular student and the type of relationship that you have with them. But this is where I might take a sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle and mark out on one side of the sheet, if you want to go to medical school, these are the criteria that you have to meet. These are the classes, these are the grades, this is the MCAT score that you have to have, this is the number of hours of experience, etc. And then point on the other side to, these are your grades in these classes. This is the MCAT score you got the last time that you took it. These are the number of hours of experience, et cetera, because seeing that side by side, I mean, sometimes we have students that can't see that they aren't really fitting the requirements yet. And so seeing it side by side can be powerful. Again, you have to be really gentle and careful about how you do that because you don't want that to be a destructive conversation. But at the right time, with the right student, done in the right way, it can be very illuminating. Helping students talk to their parents, those powerful, powerful influencers in our lives. I think that this was best illustrated for me by a student who was wanting to go to pharmacy school, and she was first generation. Her family had immigrated from Vietnam, and their story was very powerful. Her parents' story was one of escape, like literally escaping communism in the dark of night, crawling through the mud under barbed wire fences to stow away in a boat. It was the most dramatic story. And she had heard that story a lot through her life as part of a proud history in her family, but also this is what my parents have done for my siblings and me to have opportunity for a better life. And they were really set on her becoming a pharmacist, and it wasn't really working out for her. And so we had been working on this and working on this and working on this, and she was a brilliant researcher. She could go on to graduate school and do research and be really happy, but the parents were not on board. And so we agreed that she would bring her parents in, and we talked to them together. And it was even more powerful because she sat between us because she had to translate because they didn't speak enough English to talk about the academies the same way. that we would. And so I was able to convey, this is what's required, these are your daughter's strengths, here's what I could see her doing and why I think it's so great, and it's very respectable, and it's very prestigious to be a medical researcher, et cetera. And she literally had to translate that to her family and back and forth. And it was really, really powerful for me to understand what that pressure was like. But I think it also, I hope that it really helped her, because she was literally just relaying what I had said. It wasn't her saying it to her parents for the 100th time. It was somebody else relaying that information. In the end, she did end up going on to grad school and doing research, and so I think it all worked out pretty well. But that's an example of helping students talk to their parents. On our campus, we have a variety of different cultural resource centers, and I often will refer students, if they're from a cultural background different than my own and I can't really give great advice about what the dynamic in your family might be like, I'll often say, go and connect at the cultural center and ask them what's the best way you think to frame this conversation with your family, to still be respectful, et cetera. Giving permission to move on, I think that's really powerful for a dualist, right? Like, it's okay. 50% of students change their major. 25% more change it a couple of times. You'd be weird if you stayed in the major that you started. Sometimes just reframing that as an authority, as a person who is an expert, can help the students let go of it. So, the developmental approach might be more appropriate with students who are more multiplistic, right? They've moved on to many opinions. I can balance those out. I can do a little critical thinking about them, et cetera. And so the types of things that I often will talk about with those students are, what else have you explored and ruled out, and why? They may very well have just recently given up on an idea that would be a great fit. We might not be so far from a good choice for them if we go back one level and think about what else they've recently ruled out. Here's where I think you can have a little more success with that philosophical conversation about the value of happiness and fulfillment in your job and a good fit and feeling successful at it versus the success and the prestige and the money that might be driving a decision. Obvious conversations about, okay, in this field, you're going to have to do X all day. Can you do that? Is that realistic? One of my favorite interview questions for future students is, if you could do anything except be an engineer, what would you do and why? Because it feels just like a fun, interesting question, and they throw out some kind of wild things. I'd be president, I'd be an astronaut, I'd be famous. But sometimes the things that they throw out are actually really interesting insights into what they like and what they think they're good at and what they aspire to do. The Bucket List movie came out somewhere along the line in my process, and I realized I'd been having people write their college to-do lists for a while, and I realized, these are bucket lists. That's what that is. Somebody put a better name to it. So asking a student, what is your bucket list for college or your bucket list for life? And looking at that can sometimes inform ideas about career opportunities, major opportunities. Of course, there'll be lots of fun things on there too that are an important part of the college experience, but there may well be a theme or a thread of ideas there that might lead to some helpful conversation. Talking about the value of failure. I would be surprised if there's anybody in this room that feels like they've never failed at anything. And probably we can now see, at least in hindsight, the value of that failure. And so, all right, we came to college, we tried something, it didn't work out very well. But what that means is we now have an opportunity to learn from that and to apply what we learned and do something different. One of our faculty members likes to say, mistakes are proof that you're trying. And then someone else in the room always chimes in and goes, mistakes are proof that you're learning. And so I think that might be a good message to send to these students. None of us has gone all the way through without failing something. Who are you pleasing? Thinking about the students, where's that locus of control about your career identity and your major choice? Is it you? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it a whole line of other people that you are doing this for? And how do we balance that? It might be that you have a family to support and you are motivated by bringing home money to support that family, and that's important, but where do you balance it with what you need as well? So a little more theory for you. We've maybe now, through all these conversations, gotten ourselves to a place where we're ready to have a change with a student. And now we can't just dump them out there and leave them be. We probably ought to support them through that, right? Challenge and support, little Stanford for you. So I think that Nancy Schlossberg's transition theory applies nicely. She actually developed this theory, I think, primarily for work around career development. So it really fits well. She talks about transitions, which is what we've caused for a student. We are transitioning, maybe from one major to another. And she says a transition is any non-event or event that results in changed relationships, routines, assumptions, and roles. So we all have maybe a transition every day. She defines 3 types. Anticipated transitions, getting married. I knew that was coming, more than likely. Graduating from college, I knew that was coming. Those are anticipated transitions. Unanticipated transitions are things like the sudden death of a family member. We maybe didn't know that was going to happen. Not graduating from college. Well, that's not a good example. Unanticipated transition for some people might be getting pregnant. We didn't maybe know that was coming. That's an unanticipated transition. A non-event would be, I thought something was going to happen and it didn't. I thought I was all set to graduate and I didn't. And so those are the types of transitions that she looks at, and I think that they're pretty relevant in this case too. She recommends approaching these transitions, supporting a student through these transitions with the 4 S's: situation, self, support, and strategies. I wonder if it's because she only has 3 S's in her last name and wanted more. I don't know. But Schlossberg, S's, that might be a helpful way for you to remember that. So the first one, situation. Looking at the student and thinking about the situation that they're in and what are all the factors, the big picture around the cause and timing and the duration of this transition that they're going to be experiencing. And what aspects of this does the student feel that they can control? What parts are in their wheelhouse? What parts are not? And do they have any previous experience with a similar type of transition? If they've changed their major more than once, maybe so. If they've had to have those conversations at Thanksgiving with the whole family about, no, now I'm doing this, or changing their sort of identity around, I'm not pre-med anymore, I'm going to be a writer. And are there any other stressors present in their life? What's the big picture, the context in which the student will be experiencing this change? Are they also trying to find a place to live? Are they also tight on funds, relationship stresses, et cetera, that might be impacting how they're able to weather the change? The self, assessing what in the student's sort of personal well-being will affect the way that they manage this transition. So characteristics that maybe affect how they view things. I think a great example are when we would have women come into the College of Engineering, they were often very shocked because only 17% of students of engineering around the country are female. And so if they came from, say, public health or another discipline on campus that's a more even gender distribution, and now suddenly they are the only female in this class or one of only 2, et cetera, that's a real adjustment that they have to make. So just things about them that we can prepare them for or help them to capitalize on as strengths as they look ahead. Of course, the psychological resources that the student has to aid coping, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy for success in this new discipline. How have we built them up and helped them equip themselves to transition successfully? The third S is support. Makes sense, right? Who's your village? Who are the people that are going to help you through this? Who are the experts that you can call on for advice and recommendations? Who are the people that you can talk to when you're feeling scared or feeling frustrated? And how can they help you? So helping a student formulate even a list of who are these people and what can I call on them for? Or what do I think is going to happen as part of this transition and who can help me with that? Last but not least, developing strategies with the students for how they're going to work through this. Their efforts to incorporate the strategies in their lives are going to be around coping responses and coping modes, according to Schlossberg. And so the coping responses are modifying the situation, controlling the meaning, managing the stress. So that's kind of the internal, how the student thinks about it, how they encourage other people in their lives to think about it. The coping modes, these are kind of the tools that they're going to use. And so that is seeking information, taking action action on that or maybe not taking action. So helping the student just flesh out, what does this mean for you? How are we going to make this work? What are the collateral damage that you anticipate by making this change in your life? And how can we address that and prepare you for it? So all of these conversations have happened. The student is ready to make the change. We've thought through all of Schlossberg's transition support. And now it's time to make the change. And what can we do to support that by following through? Obviously, we do this all the time, making referrals. If we're sending the student to another advisor, make a call, let that person know that the student's coming, maybe share some of the backstory if you feel that it's appropriate, so that when Kim receives my referral, she's kind of up and running and knows what to expect and can really make a smooth baton handoff in that relay. We had enough students who were making other plans that we started holding Plan B workshops. And the first one that we did with the pharmacy students who really probably weren't going to be able to go on to pharmacy school successfully, we called Plan B, and then we realized very fast that with a population who works with pharmaceuticals, that was really inappropriate. So we started calling them, what can I do with a general science degree, or what else in health professions, so that students didn't feel a stigma about, well, this is where everybody who couldn't go to pharmacy school has to be farmed out. No, this is a place where I can just learn more about what else I can do with this degree and what other opportunities I have for careers. Reinforcing the student's decision, if you have a mechanism to set a calendar reminder maybe for a couple weeks later, a month later, to just reach out to that student, check in on how they're doing, affirm that you're proud of them, that they've made a good choice. You know that it's hard, but you're still here to support them if they need anything. You could, of course, recommend counseling to address the grief and the loss and the change. For some people, this is truly a transition in life that needs to be grieved. And that's okay, but let's get the resources in their hands to do that in a way that is really helpful and supportive and productive. So that kind of wraps up my ideas about working with students who maybe need to change their major or find their way onto other things. I'm happy to entertain questions, or people might share examples of things that you've done with a foreclosed student successfully. What I say is the most difficult part in advising a student out of the major. For me, because I'm a softie, I don't want to break anybody's heart. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I think that, most advisors have a pretty caring mentality, so it's hard to pop that balloon of a dream. But I think reframing it in terms of, I'm not doing this person any favors if I'm not honest with them about where they are in relationship to where they need to go. That reframe has been really helpful for me. And I found ways to have the conversation that are gentle and caring. I'm concerned about you. I am invested in your success here, and I want to see you get where you want to go. As I'm looking at what lies between where we are and where you want to go, I'm not sure how all of these hurdles will be cleared. Let's talk about it. And so that, I think, has been one of the harder things for me, just given kind of my personality. So the question is specific to when I work with pharmacy students, but I bet this would be true of most health occupations for sure. If you've got students that are doing fine, maybe not off the charts stellar, and then they get to the point of applying to medical school or pharmacy school, and they just don't quite make the cut, and they aren't admitted, what kinds of conversations do you have then, and how are they different? Those are hard, because every year a line has to be drawn somewhere, and there's a student above the line and there's a student below the line who may not be all that different. And that's really, really challenging. So in this case, if I had been encouraging the student to go and apply and felt confident about their ability to be a competitive applicant and to be a good pharmacist, I don't know that I would necessarily steer clear of that right away, but we've got to talk about what's the strategy. If you want to do this again, if you want to apply another year, what needs to happen to bump you to the next level. And a lot of students would apply knowing like, I may not have a shot this time, but I'm just gonna put my hat in, and then if I have to do it twice, that's okay. So that would help. Then we'd go back and we'd do sometimes the side-by-side comparison of, okay, where were you strong and where were there some things that maybe if you retook one class, that would put your GPA up a bit, or you didn't have a lot of experience, let's try to get you some. Tell me how your interview went, let's practice. Those kinds of things. So it is a different conversation when they're really close and it's just such a competitive thing. They could be really good at it. And so then you have to reframe around, do you want to be able to go to a different pharmacy school? Because if the end goal is become a pharmacist, nobody says the only place you can do that is Oregon State University. There are like 60, 100 pharmacy schools around the country. So if you're willing and able to look a little broader and maybe change your plan about it, you could get in and go somewhere else and still make it happen. And even if it takes one more year, this is the thing. Do you do this? Adding a year might not be a crisis in the grand scheme of your life. That conversation, right? Like, oh, it might take me 5 years to graduate. That throws off my whole life plan. Well, you might have that career for like 35 to 40 years. So if you start 1 year later, is it that much different? And I think, when we're 18 or 19, we haven't thought about it that way. The comment is about the importance of having the conversations with students about the financial impact of their education and how much of that they can truly take with them into their life. I feel like loan promissory notes seem like monopoly money. It doesn't really register for a lot of people what they're signing and what they're committing to. And so I think it's really important for us to be tracking with students. Is this feasible? And it's one thing if a student's going to go to law school and be a partner at a firm by the time they're 30 and bringing home 6 figures. All right, you might be well positioned to pay back student loans, but somebody going into education, somebody going into social work or the public sector, you might be digging yourself a hole that you will spend 20 years, 30 years digging out of. And there's lots of ways that we can help students make good choices about that. Certainly, we've got colleagues in the room from the community college system, and I'm sending students that way all the time to try and get some credits there. Smaller class sizes sometimes, maybe not than Western, but certainly than OSU, and affordable.
Yeah.
So I will say thank you for your time and coming today, and I'll hang around and chat if you'd like to talk. Thanks a lot.